Dracula, Victorian era, serial killers, Gothic horror, the Aztecs, truck, Tibetan monks, Led Zeppelin, zombies, an Armadillo Tank, and many more all played a special role in making Part 1, Phantom Blood, alone. If you watched or read JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, then you know that all this is merely just the beginning of the Bizarre Adventure. And just real quick, I wanted to credit the inspiration for this video. It was a YouTube video by Luke Wilson TV titled The Real World Mysteries of the JoJo series. It was an incredibly well-made video, and ever since I watched it months ago, I was plagued with the thinking that there must be so much more that inspired the series I love. Now, enough with the exposition, I am excited to share my findings.
You thought your first kiss would be Jojo, but it was I, Dio!
Grand total of 5 volumes, Part 1 is definitely the shortest among all the parts. It was written between early December 1986 to late October 1987. Even though today everyone knows it as The Phantom Blood, it was actually never originally titled that. It was originally titled Jonathan Joestar His Youth. Before JoJo's got its first volume, it started off in the Shonen Weekly magazine. It's within this exact magazine that you can find the original title. I did my best to scour for pictures of the specific panel where it says it, but I couldn't find it for the life of me. I exhausted the use of even 2 AI models and still couldn't find it. So the best I have is this right here. And obviously the reason why it was subtitled that way was because that was the basis of the first major arc of the series. The magazine aside, the first official volume has a funny thing on the cover. As you can see, there's no Phantom Blood anywhere on it, or the sign of Jonathan's youth, but rather on the left side you can see a subtitle for the first major chapter named Dio the Invader. Not only is Dio trying to ruin Jonathan's life, but he also took over his spot as a subtitle for the part. The name Phantom Blood or Phantom Bloodline came later in the year 2000 when the official art book for JoJo's came out, JoJo A Go-Go. In 2015, Hirohiko Araki would release a book titled Manga in Theory and Practice. And in this book, he reveals his inspiration of East of Eden in his story. In retrospect, it does make sense because in East of Eden, released in 1952 by John Steinbeck, it focuses on a generational storytelling using the infamous Bible story, Cain and Abel, as a structure. In East of Eden, it focuses on the members of the Trask family and their struggle of good versus evil. Particularly the use of Timshel, which is Hebrew for thou mayest. And what this kind of means is you can choose to do good or evil. You can choose to succumb to sin or choose to be better. Taking this and attributing it to JoJo's, Jonathan would always willingly choose to do the right thing even if it comes at the cost of himself. Like very early on when he goes to save Erina Pendleton from the bullies, like he knew he was going to get his ass beat, but he still chose to do it anyway. And fast forward to the castle in Midnight's Lot, Jonathan Joestar really doesn't want to kill Dio Brando even after everything he's done. He knows he has to, but he doesn't want to because Dio Brando, despite everything that happened, is still his brother. But on the contrary, Dio Brando always chooses to be evil. After being confronted by Jonathan and trying to poison George Joestar, Dio Brando had a choice, and it really seemed like early on he was gonna turn himself in and do the right thing, but as we all know,
何のことだ? 何を言っている?
俺は人間をやめるぞジョジョ俺は人間を超越する
Jack the Ripper. No, not that one. This one. As most of you might already know, Jack the Ripper was a serial killer in the 19th century all the way in 1888, and he remained uncaught. Funny enough, 1 century later he would appear in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Jack the Ripper in JoJo's appears coincidentally in 1888, right after the 7-year time skip of the main story, only to be found by Dio in recovery from the injuries he faced in the Joestar mansion. Dio then recruits Jack the Ripper to join him, of course by turning him into a vampire. And I don't know about you, but I think the rest of the stuff from here is slightly inaccurate from the real Jack the Ripper. The Gary Heidnik case of 1986 to 1987 isn't explicitly mentioned, but it's heavily implied by Araki himself. This coward would target women, kidnap them, torture them, rape them, and then kill them. By bringing them to a pit he dug in his house, had the basement floor, and he would take them out one at a time, and yeah. Rather than focusing on Gary's heinous crimes, I want to highlight the real heroes of the story, and it's the victims, especially Josefina Rivera. Josefina persevered, freed herself from captivity, and managed to escape and get help, an act that ultimately saved 3 more lives. Tragically though, Sandra Lindsay and Deborah Dudley both lost their lives in the house. This case might sound familiar, and that's because this case also played a role in inspiring Silence of the Lambs' Buffalo Bill. He was doing this between the years 1986 and 1987, which was the years when JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1 is being written. In his comment, he was specifically talking about the thought process behind creating Dio Brando. After all, if you're looking to make a twisted, conniving villain, then who better than to look for inspiration than in actual serial killers? And in his comment, that's what he mentioned. He mentioned he had a fascination with an FBI psychological case. It was particularly with the controlling aspect of the case. You know, like why he would do all this and why would he go so far. In both the anime and the manga, we all probably know the mother scene where she's pleading to Dio to spare, at the very least, her child. That scene in particular highlights this influence really well. On a much lighter note, that was also like the only like super disturbing thing like tied to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that I could find. The rest is like really tame. In the official art book JoJo 6251, released in 2023, it was officially revealed the inspiration behind the famous Joestar mansion before it is burned down, of course. And it is the Governor's Palace in Williamsburg, Virginia. And even though I don't own the book to take pictures and show you, you can kind of see the resemblance in the photos. First off, I want to apologize because I know that this isn't the right part for the song, but it's such a banger. I have to play it when I'm talking about the Aztecs in general, even if the Pillarmen aren't involved whatsoever. But anyway, if you are only watching the anime, then you only know so much about the mask in part 1, because they only really revealed how to activate the mask and what happens when a user wears it when it's activated. You really only get to know like the origins of the mask in part 2, Battle Tendency. But in the manga, the very first chapter is the prologue. And the prologue, they basically reveal everything you need to know about the mask. That was made by the Aztecs, how to activate it, what happens when you wear it, etc. And on the topic of Aztecs, they really love their bloodletting and human sacrifices, so that is obviously incorporated into the design of the stone mask. I do want to mention that there is no sign of the Pillarmen. Like no cars, no AC/DC, no WAMU, no Santana even. But there is an unnamed guy at the focal point of the prologue, but he doesn't have a name, and it's definitely not a Pillarman. It's pretty cool to see like what would be the skeleton of what is part 2 today. Now as for the stone mask itself, it is also Aztec inspired, and it also doubles as a Phantom of the Opera reference. But the design itself is mainly like Aztec with a blend of like Gothic horror. As for how the stone mask functions, it's very like acupuncture coded, like with the way it like jabs into your brain and awakens your potential. So you got a bit of Chinese culture in there. And then also pretty interesting too is that the Aztec people are also known as the people of the sun, which as we all know is kind of like the main source of power for Hamon. Now, obviously, monks do exist, but I wanted to focus specifically on the Tibetan monks because they inspired the Hamon masters of Dire, Straizo, and of course, Master Tonpetty. And I also wanted to highlight too that in Tibetan monk culture there is a lama, which pretty much just means guru or a special one. Master Tonpetty is wearing a Tibetan monk lama-inspired outfit, which of course fits Tonpetty's role in Part 1. Even though the Tibetan monks don't practice Hamon, they technically practice half of Hamon, because even though they don't channel the power of the fucking sun, they do utilize like breathing techniques for like meditation and stuff. So we're halfway there, really.
Jesus is my virtue, and Judas is the demon I cling to. I cling to just a bullet full of baby, it's approval.
Mary, Queen of Scots versus Queen Elizabeth I. And just as JoJo's Part 1 mentioned, their rivalry in the 16th century is based in real history. Queen Mary was a devout Catholic, and Queen Elizabeth was a Protestant. When the throne was at stake and their religions are different, naturally there's going to be a divide. And Queen Mary was married 3 times, and 2 of those husbands met untimely and suspicious deaths, and this led to Queen Elizabeth to accuse her of mariticide, which is the murder of her husband. This specific mariticide accusation came after the death of her second husband, Lord Darnley, who died at Kirko Field in 1567 due to a gunpowder explosion. The accusation was taken into account, and this led Queen Elizabeth to capture Mary and keep her in prison for about 19 years. And then would, of course, come the execution for treason. Their ultimate rivalry ended up in Queen Mary being executed by a beheading in the year 1587. Meanwhile, in JoJo's, it was 1565. And unfortunately, Queen Mary did not have knights that passed the trial of 77 rings, because the trial of 77 rings was fictional, and she didn't have a kick-ass knight with a killer hairdo and a big burly knight by the name of Tarkus to help her out. So if only she just had those, then history would 100% played out differently. Les Misérables. Only this photo is a lot more recent. We need a more time-appropriate photo. There we go. Victor Hugo's Les Misérables. Released all the way back in 1862, has played a huge role in the influence of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1, particularly with the character development of Dio Brando. This is because Dio Brando's character builds off of his father, Dario Brando, and his relationship with George Joestar, Jonathan's father. Les Misérables' Jean Valjean mirrors JoJo's Bizarre Adventure's Dario Brando. Jean Valjean is also born into a life of poverty. Because he lives in poverty, he is driven to steal things that he otherwise can't afford, and this would ultimately land him in prison for about 19 years. After his sentence is up, Valjean quickly runs into trouble with the law once again, and he's now on the run. That is until he ran into the Bishop Muriel. Bishop Muriel, who is very dedicated to his beliefs, offers Valjean a chance to take shelter at his place, in which Valjean ultimately agrees to. However, because of his impoverished nature and his life at that time, he was prompted to steal again, but from the man who granted him shelter and saved him from the law. Valjean ends up taking the bishop's silver and makes a run for it, but he gets caught. They found the silver, they know who it belongs to, so they take him back to the bishop. And even though Bishop Muriel knew what Valjean did, he still backed him up and he said, "No, I gave him this," which is eerily familiar to George Joestar backing Dario Brando up, who he knows he stole from him his wife's ring, and he backs him up and he gets released from prison. Funny enough, after the bishop backs up Valjean, he chooses to be better. He chooses to strive for redemption and a life of altruism, which is the polar opposite of what Dario Brando chooses to do. Shifting over to a different point of Les Misérables is the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. This part of the story follows 2 different characters of the story, one of them being Colonel Georges Pontmercy.
Nobody wins with a headbutt.
Colonel Georges Pontmercy absolutely annihilated his skull. Status retired. And once the dust has settled from the battle, another character by the name of Thénardier comes along to scavenge from the bodies, in which case he ends up on top of the body of Georges, and he unknowingly resuscitates him. And even though Thénardier was ill-intentioned, it didn't seem that way to Georges, so he felt like he was indebted gratitude to him.
運命が私の命をした命を捨ててくれた弁護士にまた気を失う前にあなたの名を聞かせてほしいこいつ俺を命の恩人と
Eventually, Colonel Georges will find himself on a deathbed, and he makes sure to leave behind a letter for his son, basically saying, hey, go after Thénardier and find a way to repay him. Which is ironic because Thénardier isn't a good person. He's basically a criminal mastermind, like the Kingpin from Spider-Man, which is in contrast to Dario Brando and George Joestar with the letter that gives Dio access to invade the Joestar mansion, and then the plot point just picks off from there.
Drac, you ready to throw down?
No, I just came closer to hear you better.
Oh, come on, just give it a try.
All right, maybe just a little.
震えるほど心燃え尽きるほど熱くその手から放て鼓動体みなぎる勇気で迷いなき覚悟に喝采をその血の定めジョー
Bram Stoker's Dracula, released in 1897. In a November 2007 issue of the Eureka magazine, Hirohiko Araki revealed how Dracula influenced the story of JoJo's. There were other things in that interview that were interesting as well, such as that there was pushback for making a foreign character and setting the story in a foreign country at the time. As a brief synopsis of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the vampire Count Dracula moves to England with the intention of spreading his, quote, curse, unquote. Count Dracula ends up engaging in conflict with a group led by Professor Abraham Van Helsing. Van Helsing, who alone has heavy influences on manga with the manga of the same name, does not quite resemble Jonathan Joestar. Rather, I found that he shares a similar role in the story as Will A. Zeppeli's role in JoJo's. In the beginning of Dracula, a character by the name of Jonathan Harker begins the story by traveling to Dracula's castle in Transylvania, then becoming trapped. Over the course of time, Jonathan was tortured by Dracula's brides, and only escaped from the castle after Dracula ventured off to England. With the help of Van Helsing's group, Jonathan Harker was able to reunite with Count Dracula much later on in the story, allowing Jonathan to deliver the final blow to Dracula. I find the similarities here to be almost striking. It is also interesting that it seems Dio and Jonathan Harker share a similar beginning, but instead Dio obviously retains the characteristics of Dracula. If we're swapping the stories of Dracula and JoJo's, it'd be like if Count Dracula invades the home of Jonathan Harker, and he of course tortures him. Johnny!
Oh no!
It's Dracula's left eye!
I'm respecting your privacy by knocking, but asserting my authority as your father by coming in anyway!
Basically, it's like looking at an alternate dimension of the Dracula storyline. Between both Les Misérables and Dracula, it's interesting to see that Les Misérables seems to shape up some of the characters and their conflicts, meanwhile Dracula helps shape up like the plot structure. However, there is one more major influence on JoJo's that I want to cover, and it's a notorious work from Biron-san and Tetsuo Hara for the character design and art. This is, of course, Fist of the North Star.
貴様の拳などかほどにも効かんわいお前はもう死んでいる何
Both Berserk and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is among my favorite series of all time, and to find out that they're both inspired by the same manga is honestly just awesome. Prior to this, I was already aware of Fist of the North Star's existence, but I just never got a chance to watch it, and I really do want to start collecting the manga too. And after the research that I'd done for this video, it's definitely shot up on my to-buy list. But anyways, during my research, the illustrator Tetsuo Hara and Hirohiko Araki are both friends in real life. And you also don't need me to tell you that the inspiration is quite clear from the pictures. I mean, to get down into specifics though, both Jonathan and Kenshiro are strikingly similar in both art style and character design. Going way beyond Part 1, Phantom Blood, you can see the martial arts and inspiration clearly. And during Stone Ocean's Bohemian Rhapsody arc, you can even see a reference on the TV of this panel here, which of course made it into the anime as well. Not to mention Hamon and Hokuto Shinken share striking similarities as well.
死んでいる。何秒後だ。そうだ、10秒ってとこかな。集めてやるぜ。10、9、8、7、6、5、4、3、2、1、0。
Hokuto Shinken is the chosen martial art method in Fist of the North Star, where striking specific points on a body can have either devastating or healing effects. Similar to Hamon, Hokuto Shinken is also passed down to specific individuals, or in Fist of the North Star's case, only one person. Karate Baka Ichidai, or just Karate Master by Iki Kajiwara, was directly quoted by Hirohiko Araki for inspiration of breathing in Hamon, inside the first volume of Phantom Blood. With Hirohiko Araki clearly being a fan of martial arts manga, it's no wonder that high-octane action films like First Blood, which is Rambo, and Terminator, plus a legendary debate of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. And when we could clearly see the inspiration for Jonathan's physique within these two men. Hirohiko Araki explicitly said that he wanted Jonathan to exude a aura of unstoppableness, and you can see that clearly in both the manga and the anime. In the anime, he jumps over a fucking fountain. Jonathan Joestar is just an absolute unit.
Wax on, right hand. Wax off, left hand.
Will Antonio Zeppeli, the one and only, takes the role as the mentor figure in Part 1. Araki designed Zeppeli with the mindset of a mentor with an unusual goofy quirk, kind of like in the Jackie Chan movies with the infamous drunk mentor trope, and in Karate Kid 1984 with Mr. Miyagi. Other major and important inspirations include Salvador Dali and Osamatsu-kun's Iyami from the 1980s, specifically for Will A. Zeppeli's mustache. And on the topic of his mustache, funny enough, Araki also mentions the gamble was to actually keep the mustache on Zeppeli in the story. Which does make sense, because when he first appears, he honestly does look like a villain, because that's the type of mustache that goes on the cartoon villains. But lucky enough, I think the gamble paid off, and Will Antonio's mustache has given him a sick-ass design and makes him stand out, especially with the outfit. It just completes the whole look.
Tell me, to undo your injuries, how many innocent lives did you consume?
I don't know. How many loaves of bread have you eaten in your lifetime?
Dio!
Dio Brando. The name Dio literally translates to the word God in Italian, which was 100% intentional by Araki, as it perfectly encapsulates the character. The last name was noted to be from Marlon Brando, the actor in which he is known for playing iconic, calculated, ruthless villains in films like The Godfather from 1972, or Apocalypse Now from 1979. In an interview with Hirohiko Araki by Kotoba, Araki revealed the source of inspiration for Dio's initial design to be Roy Batty, who was played by Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner 1982. Particularly, it was Batty's physique and hair that stood out, and would later make its way into Dio's creation. I think from older Dio, it is a bit difficult to pinpoint the inspiration, but early on the resemblance is much more clear. Now, I should mention, for the sake of comparison, this is one of the better images I was able to get, because as you can imagine, searching up young Dio shirtless is certainly to leave a mark on my digital footprint. The hairstyle isn't necessarily identical, but the color is the same, and Araki's comment on it being short and neatly trimmed is sort of present in the design. Aside from Dio being a befitting name for the character, it doubles as a musical reference. Ronnie James Dio, aka the former singer of Black Sabbath, started a heavy metal band named Dio, all in capitals. Similar enough, Dio would also have his name changed in JoJo's, from just Dio Brando to just Dio in Part 3, Stardust Crusaders. Everyone and their mom knows that JoJo's references music all the time with their names and stand names. But I did not realize just how much musical references are in Part 1 alone. Let's start with the obvious. Will A. Zeppeli. Zeppeli and the entire Zeppeli bloodline is a Led Zeppelin reference, but there is actually a lot more in the name. For example, his first name, Will or William, derives from another 19th century English novelist, William Makepeace Thackeray. This is a fact because directly after Zeppeli's death, his official one, in the end of chapter 35, Pluck for Tomorrow and the Successor, one of Thackeray's quotes is shown. Fashion is where the Antonio part of Zeppeli's name comes from. Fashion illustrator Antonio Lopez has heavily influenced JoJo's fashion and even the iconic poses. I knew about the high fashion influence, but I did not realize how many were from Antonio Lopez alone. It's like witnessing the Mona Lisa being painted scrolling through these images. I should also mention Antonio Lopez also has a similar mustache to his JoJo's counterpart. Pretty badass.
Anyone knows what these pigs are up to. It's Mighty Eagle.
I may have sold you short, amico. I thought you would run when things got truly dire. Mi dispiace.
Robert E.O. Speedwagon. If this guy got even half a penny for every time he's been referenced or mentioned in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and to JoJo's fandom, he'd be as rich as he was in the anime. REO Speedwagon has some history behind him as well. When the actual band REO Speedwagon was coming about, they named themselves after another REO Speedwagon, which was a 1915 automobile by the exact same name. It was named this way because the inventor of the REO Speedwagon was named Ransom Eli Olds. What is also intriguing is that since the REO Speedwagon was a truck, or vehicle, it reminisces itself with Speedwagon's influence in JoJo's, with the Speedwagon Foundation literally driving the Joestars forward in the plot. So to sum this up, JoJo's REO Speedwagon is named after the band REO Speedwagon, which was named after the truck REO Speedwagon, which was named after its master, Ransom Eli Olds. Speedwagon lore runs deep, just like his influence in the world of JoJo's. Poker Underarms, released in 1980, and it was an original one-shot manga by Hirohiko Araki, set in the Wild West about high-stakes poker matches. But one character in particular is a clear prototype to what would end up becoming Speedwagon's iconic design. And this was Mike Harper. The resemblance is practically uncanny. One other minor thing is Speedwagon's initial appearance in Ogre Street is heavily in tune with Queen's song Ogre Battle, which we already know how much Queen is referenced in JoJo's already. Both Dire and Straizo are a nod to 1977 rock band Dire Straits, and Dire's upgraded attack, Thunder Cross Split Attack, has a visual nod to the album cover for Love Over Gold. Tonpetty and Tonpetty. I'm actually unsure if this is supposed to be a reference or not. Aside from the clear Tibetan monk influence, the only main thing I could find is his relation to a character in Fist of the North Star, Master Ryukin. Master Ryukin was a grandmaster of Hokudu Shinken, just like Tonpetty is with Hamon.
我が女王より賜ったこの剣に刻んである言葉を捧げよう。ラック。そして君の未来へこれを持って行け。ブラック。
Bruford and Tarkus. Both Bruford and Tarkus are references to early British rock bands. Bruford and Tarkus are paired together because both Bill Bruford and Emerson, Lake and Palmer were like the Arnold vs. Sylvester debate, but for progressing early British rock. Dark Knight Bruford is based on the real-life Bill Bruford, a jazz percussionist who was present in multiple bands, notable ones being King of Crimson.
It's peered through time to trace your trajectory. The trajectory of your future self. When Emperor Crimson wields its extraordinary power, time as we know it flits away, and all memories formed therein completely cease to exist. Clouds are torn asunder and know not why. Now feel the power of Emperor Crimson!
Forgot what I was doing there. It's probably not important. Anyway, and yes. Yes, of course, is responsible for Roundabout, the ending song for parts 1 and 2. Eventually, Bill Bruford started his own band, Bruford, from 1977 to 1980. Bruford's technique, Dance Macabre Hair, a play on words of Dance Macabre, translates to Dance of Death, which is a homage to Camille Saint-Saëns' poem. The poem is about the dead resurrecting to life in order to dance in the moonlight, eerily alike to Bruford's role in the story. Tarkus, by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Tarkus is the name of the album released by Emerson, Lake and Palmer in 1971. Tarkus is a stark contrast to Bruford, and he takes homage to Fist of the North Star's heart, where it is here that brute strength will not be enough to get past the foes in their respective universes. Visually speaking, Araki used the Emerson, Lake and Palmer album cover for Tarkus, featuring an Armadillo Tank hybrid to design Tarkus and Jojo. An underrated character in JoJo's is Erina Pendleton. Her first name is actually based off of a Beatles song, Eleanor Rigby. However, when pronounced phonetically in Japanese, it reads as Erina and not Eleanor. This is because in native Japanese, the letters L and V don't have a distinct sound. Instead, they pronounce their L's like an R. Beatles song Eleanor Rigby is a song focused on loneliness and the unheard lives of ordinary people in society. This is kinda tragically parallel to Erina's story, as her story is basically isolated by the fate of the stone mask and the tragedies it has ensued. She outlives like nearly everyone in part 1 aside from Speedwagon, and after the loss of her husband Jonathan and her son George Joestar II in part 2, Erina is left alone in raising Joseph Joestar. I couldn't find anything relative to her last name, so I am sure it is purely unattached to any references. As a side note, the scene in the honeymoon boat where Erina backs up to a wall and zombies burst through it was deliberately a reference to George Romero's Day of the Dead, released in 1985.
I'm sailing away.
I'm ashamed to admit it, but this one flew over my head. Father Styx. Obviously a reference to the band Styx. Father Styx literally has like maybe 10 seconds in the anime and 3 pages in the manga, but he is the guy that is killed by Dio on the boat after dropping his crucifix down into the cargo area. As you may know, Styx is responsible for their iconic song Come Sail Away, released in 1977. And obviously, as the name suggests, it's about a man sailing away at sea, but it has a funny little twist at the end where he gets abducted by aliens. And this is paralleled in JoJo's because Father Styx sails away on the honeymoon boat with Jonathan and Erina, and of course he meets the vampire Dio Brando instead of being abducted by aliens, of course. And yeah, that's the story in JoJo's. As for this last segment, it's just a bunch of really niche, minor references that we can just rapid fire. Let's start with the Led Zeppelin zombies. Prominent members of the band show up as zombies to ambush Jonathan and the group at the climax of When Night's Lot Castle, with guitarist Jimmy Page, bassist John Paul Jones, vocalist Robert Plant, and drummer John Bonham. Doobie, the snake-headed zombie that was initially introduced ambushing Poco's sister, and later fights Jonathan in the castle. Doobie is a reference to the Doobie Brothers. Wang Chan, Dio's loyal Chinese apothecary, is a reference to the band Wang Chung, who sang Everybody Have Fun Tonight. Poco, the kid that accompanies Jonathan with Led Zeppelin and Speedwagon, is a reference to the band of the same name. Danny, Jonathan's beloved dog, is a tribute to Danny's song from 1971 by Loggins and Messina, which are 2 more familiar names if you've seen part 2. Dan Hammer, briefly mentioned in chapter 41, and it's a manga exclusive, references Jan Hammer, who composes for Miami Vice in 1984. Jeff Beck, just like Dan Hammer, it was mentioned in chapter 41, and is a nod to English guitarist Jeff Beck. Adams, the tongue zombie is a direct nod to musician Bryan Adams. Tattoo, one of the dogs with Speedwagon in his introduction is a nod to rock band The Rolling Stones album Tattoo You. If you made it to the end, thank you. This is the first time I've ever made a video like this, ever. I've written essays in the past, but never one to present to people. And I'm just a big fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Both the anime, and I'm ready for the manga, and I'll include the manga too. And this is my current collection I have right now, and I think it's beautiful. I have a Diavolo figure coming in soon. I can't wait to add that to it. I'm hoping to do a video like this for parts 2 through 6. And apologies for the narration in the Gary Heidnik case one. I wanted to be as respectful to the victims as possible because the victims are still alive. And I didn't want to do like the whole Netflix thing where they low-key just glorify the killer. So it's my first time doing something like that for a video like this, so I could do better if something like that pops up for the other parts. But anyway, thank you for watching.